Thank you.
Reprise du débat, l'honorable député.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Thornhill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honoured to rise in this House to speak today to an issue that people in the Great Riding of Thornhill and across the country see as a priority. I'm also letting you know that I'm going to be splitting my time with my honourable colleague from Mégantic-Érable. Mr. Speaker, we have a housing crisis. This country is facing a severe housing shortage, contributing to unprecedented increases in housing prices in almost every part of the country, including one of the hardest hit regions in this country, the GTA. The government simply can't ignore this, and I've heard it on the campaign. I hear it in my constituency. I hear it from many young people who continue to inspire me, but whose dream of home ownership is falling further and further out of reach. Some even laugh at me when I suggest a future in which they own a home anywhere near my riding. And worse, I think prospective home buyers have started tempering their expectations. I never thought that I would describe this country as a land of tempering expectations. But here we are. And in my community, Mr. Speaker, the biggest fear for parents and their constant refrain is that my kids can't afford to live in the same neighborhood they grew up in. I hear it over and over again. My kids can't afford to live here, full stop. And there's a bigger issue in all of this. And when you can't afford to live where you grew up, when you're priced out of the market, there is deep, deep impacts on families and on the community. Its impacts on the connection between us, between one another. And it has deep impacts on our connections to institutions that help build our communities, our churches, our synagogues, our senior centers, the connection points that do the work that government can't and never should, are further out of reach. And so we live further from our parents, and we see them less, and they see us less, not because we don't want to, but because we've been priced out. So when many are leaving the communities entirely, they're moving to more affordable parts of the country, wherever those places may be. It doesn't sound like there are very many, and they're driving the prices up there and starting the same cycle. So there was a billboard in downtown Toronto that said, "Can't afford a house? Get richer parents." And while this might be tongue-in-cheek, it's not untrue. Here's the problem, Mr. Speaker. I don't have rich parents. Most Canadians don't have rich parents. Well, I suppose some do, but most don't. The real estate forecast in Toronto and in my riding at its gates will see huge gains next year. The average price is expected to hit $1.16 million.
Wow. In
October, that's up 10% this year. Over the past year, the average sale price increased 7%. That's 7% higher than the almost $1.2 million that it's going to take to break into the market. So you're going to need some very, very rich parents to break into that housing market. And the government will tell you that this is all a product of global inflation and supply chains and whatever the buzzwords of the week happen to be. But this side of the House continues to point out over and over again, with the hopes that one day this government will realize that land prices aren't actually tied to global supply chains. So the Prime Minister has failed to take action and address the growing housing and affordability crisis in Canada. In fact, home prices have reached record levels. As I just said, prices have risen under this government by more than 20%. So the government had 6 years to fix the rising home prices in Canada, but the problem has only gotten worse. And instead of putting forward policies to build homes, the government has doubled down on failed policy and pumped billions of taxpayer dollars into a national housing strategy. The national housing strategy from the government has actually resulted in higher home prices. So the government's affordable housing strategy has built housing units that are actually more expensive than the average rent. That's right, more expensive, not less. So you'll hear the government brag about spending money on this issue, and record amount of cash actually, and yet $1.2 million for a starter home in my riding is a record that nobody wanted to break. It's one that we can't actually afford to break. So, Mr. Speaker, it's the wrong metric. You can never define the success of a federal strategy with the number of tax dollars that the government can spend. The metric should be the number of Canadians who are able to access the home that they need, the home that they want. So, with all of those tax dollars, the promise to build and repair over 1 million homes, construction is actually down from the last election to this past one, and that means things are actually getting worse. So, Mr. Speaker, our motion today touches on something very serious. There's a lot of foreign money flowing into Canada's housing market. Some of this being funded through money laundering and proceeds of crimes. In some cases, foreign investors are sitting on the investments and leaving homes empty. 1.3 million. That's how many empty homes there are in Canada. I'll repeat that, 1.3 million. So obviously we know that this pushes prices up, putting home ownership further and further out of reach for more and more Canadians. And the government solution is to actually tax them 1%. So billionaires have this government on their Christmas card list because of how absolutely generous they are at the cost of Canadians. Today's motion offers something better for Canadians. It's to ban foreign ownership. Billionaires abroad won't like it, but Canadians will, and our motion today has solutions. In fact, so many of my colleagues have provided thoughtful solutions in this House. Take, for example, the vast amount of land and buildings the federal government owns. More than 37,000 of them. We've heard that number before, nearly 41 million hectares of land. It's a substantial amount of property and buildings that could immediately provide the municipalities and provinces with help on supply. This is, after all, a supply-side problem. These are tangible solutions, and we are faced with a government who simply spends more to get less. So I have more in the way of solutions, since I have some time. This is a government that can work well to tie in, what can work well is if we tie it to infrastructure funding, the building of houses. Infrastructure is dollars that they spend on housing supply. That is, if the infrastructure dollars ever get out the door. I know there's some trouble with that, but we suggested building more in high-density areas, working with municipalities who are already getting cash for infrastructures. And stakeholders agreed, and communities in which it would be built welcomed it. And it seems that the government also agreed, at least to announce them over and over again, stopping short of just building them. So this motion makes clear that we also never want the government to commit to introducing a capital gains tax on the sale of primary residences. And for communities like mine, of whom, like my parents, came to this country in the 70s, fulfilled their dream of home ownership through hard work, and they didn't have the benefit of fancy financial advisors or a retirement savings plan. For them, the equity in their homes is their retirement plan. That's it. And that's how it is for many. And I'm sure that with that tax, you won't see very many home sales regardless. I hope that members opposite understand that this is not a phenomenon that exists just in Thornhill. It exists for many others. Mr. Speaker, I've heard all day from those who have tied themselves in knots with reasons to not support this motion. But I'll remind members that we've been talking about solutions. We've heard it from the member of Carleton, who apparently lives rent-free in the heads of the members opposite. Our own platform made commitments to increase the rate of home construction, to build 1 million homes over the next 3 years, to make homes more affordable by renewing the extensive real estate portfolio of the government, the largest property owner with over 37,000 buildings. And we are talking about buildings, Mr. Speaker, and releasing at least 15% of that so we can build some more homes. We talked about requiring municipalities receiving federal funding to tie them to high-density public transit, things like that. We brought forward the notion that encouraged Canadians to invest in rental homes by allowing the deferral of capital gains tax when selling a rental property. Imagine that from this government. There are many. We want to see a government committed also to making it easier to get a mortgage. Mr. Speaker, I know my time is running out, and for those reasons and many others, and I'll be pleased to take questions, on this last opposition day of the year, I hope that members of this House support the review and consolidation of all federal real estate in order to make 15% of that available for development. I hope that members will vote to ban foreign investors from purchasing Canadian real estate and commit to never introducing a capital gains tax on primary residences, ever.